long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University. And today I'm actually joined by our widest ideological guests that we have. On the left, we have, as always, Ken Katkin, professor of law at Chase Law School. And on the right, we have our conservative counterpart and former Trump White House lawyer, May Mailman. May, Ken, welcome to The Politics Guys.
Hey, Trey, it's great to be back.
Well, before we get into the show, I just wanted to start by saying a huge thank you to Michael, who actually became a yearly supporter on Patreon, and that saves him 10% over monthly support. And to Owen, another yearly supporter who recently increased his level of support and got the same savings. I want to just thank you, Michael and Owen, for being part of the Politics Guys family. And you too can be incredible like Owen and head to patreon.com right now and lock in a 10% saving by becoming a yearly member. So, Ken, May, as a matter of fact, May, this is our first time doing the show together. I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, me too. I'm usually with Mike, and so it's fun to switch it up.
Yeah, I mean, we get to we'll get to decide where we fall on that ideological spectrum. I love it. We got some fun things coming up. And now this week, I think probably the biggest story, then the one that I think we'll probably spend some significant time on, was the National Association of Black Journalists. And they had either controversially or not controversially, that's maybe a question in itself, invited former President Donald Trump. And he made an appearance at the NABJ convention in Chicago here on July 1st. And the panel was moderated by Scott, along with Harris Faulkner of Fox News and Katie Agaba of Simafar and others. Really, the idea being to be covering and looking at issues affecting the Black community. Now, the event was significant because it ended up being, pretty contentious in its nature. It starts off with Donald Trump facing a pretty tough question from journalists, particularly ABC News' Rachel Scott. And so during that Q&A session, Scott asked Trump about his past remarks and actions that many consider offensive to Black Americans, specifically his promotion of birtherism directed at Nikki Haley and Barack Obama, and his comments directed at Black politicians and journalists, telling them to go back to where they came from. And Trump characteristically responded quite aggressive and defensively and went on the attack, and he criticized Scott's manner of questioning and reiterating his claim of having done much for the Black community. He also has some pretty negative comments for Scott and ABC News, calling them fake journalists, and for the entire proceeding, which he noted was, quote, late by 30 minutes, end quote. And, of course, done without his opponent. And he went on to call her and the question nasty. Now, that would have been news enough, but as he continued to answer, Trump offered that didn't even know that Harris thought of herself as Black. He argued that she had been Indian, was now Black, and that he likes both Indians and Blacks in his words, but Harris must not because she doesn't know who he is. Now, the aftermath of that was a ton of commentary. J.D. Vance, Trump's vice presidential running mate, called the exchange, quote unquote, hilarious because Trump is willing to go into the hostile environments. Many Republicans were simply replying with no comment. Democrats were saying, well, of course, this is par for the course. Vice Presidential Kamala Harris herself responded to Trump's comments and said that while he can question her racial identity, really what he's doing is just being, quote unquote, divisive and disrespectful. She emphasized the need for leadership that unites rather than divides, and that America deserves a leader who recognizes there's a strength in difference and doesn't engage with such disparaging discourse. So, I mean, there's a lot to get on there. And so, May, I thought we'd turn to you first. What were your thoughts on the exchange and the aftermath of that exchange?
So, just first, I guess, on the political ramifications, I don't really know if there are any. There's always just so much noise coming from Trump that just more stuff doesn't really add. It's like a nothing matters type thing. So I guess I would say, though, that it was a missed opportunity. What we're not talking about here is that Kamala Harris has not had a press interview, has not had a press conference since being deemed the presidential candidate for the Democrats. So she's not had to face any tough questions. She did not show up to the National Association of Black Journalists conference. And yet we're not talking about that. We're not talking about how her policies, how the Biden administration's policies harm, all Americans, I guess. I really don't love saying Black Americans, right? It'd be like harm Americans. We're not talking about that. We're talking about like Trump's inability to like calmly answer a question. So in that sense, it was a missed opportunity. But I don't, the fallout commentary from the left of like this is so disrespectful and so terrible. Like,
well, what about specifically his comments
like,
there on race?
He's
like,
an equal opportunity. What?
So what about his specifically on that second part then? I think the first part was probably, as you were saying, more the particular, this is how Trump approaches things. But when he started riffing on her racial identity.
Yeah, I think, what he means to say is not anything particularly unique to any politician, which is like all of a sudden when she was holding a rally in Atlanta, instead of saying 2024, she says 2024, like using an urban accent. It's like, you grew up in Canada. That's not you. This is fake. You're being a fake person. And so I think her being a fake person is a ding against her. People don't like politicians that are fake. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons why people like Trump. He is who he is. You get what you get. Was it the best way to go about doing that? No, like obviously she is Black. She's half Black. Obama was half Black. You are Black. Like, I think that's undeniable. She's emphasized various different parts of her background, sort of depending on what time it is and depending where she is. So I don't love it, but I think Trump world thinks it is funny. Like, I did get a lot of text messages being like, this is really funny, because it is calling out her just general fake affect, which I do think will ultimately be a problem for her, is that she is a shapeshifter and it's hard to find out what's genuine about her. And so maybe he didn't hit the nail on the head here, but I do think that maybe not the race angle, but her fakeness is going to be at issue in this election.
Ken, tackle that response and your thoughts.
Well, first, it's a little disappointing to me. This is the first time I've ever been on with May, and I've never met her before. And the first thing I'm responding to think that I'm already having to call out bold-faced lies like that Kamala Harris grew up in Canada. That's just a lie, and I'll just put that out there. And it's kind of that's weird. It's a weird way to start the episode. But in terms of the other broader things that you asked. Certainly, we have seen some movement in the polls, and I had already predicted this last week's show, and now I think in the 6 polls that I saw that came out this week, Harris has actually pulled ahead in 4 of them. So I don't know if that can be completely attributed to it probably can't be completely attributed to her appearance or to Trump's appearance before the Black journalists, but certainly that happened this week. Movement continued to be towards Harris this week, so I don't think you can just cavalierly say it had no political impact. And finally, on the substance of it, it's a really gross kind of racism that Trump was displaying. In the old days of segregation, and even in South Africa up into the 1980s when they had apartheid, people would really obsess over these meaningless racial categories. And, how many drops of blood did someone have to have that were of African descent to count as black? And how do you think about South Asian people? And are they colored? Are they black? And, this is all kind of really like apartheid type thinking. And the fact that Trump was really just, indulging it, I think does say a lot about who he is.
May, I do kind of question, as you were kind of saying that it was maybe part of her fakeness, it does seem a little weird to think of her racial identity as being part of her fakeness. Why don't you talk into that response as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't saying that her racial identity is part of her fakeness. I said that it seems like when you emphasize different parts of yourself, and I wouldn't even say necessarily like your racial background, but when you sort of, I don't know, seem like a different person based on where you are, in general, I think voters don't like that. So I don't know enough about like whether she grew up identifying as one thing or another. I'm half Asian and half white, and so like in that sense, I guess we have similar like half and half. But I don't sort of identify as one thing one day and another thing another day, and I would never like change the way that I speak in front of different people to try and appear some way that I'm not. I am who I am. I'm half Asian and I'm half white. So is this going to be a good way for Trump to go about like attacking Kamala? No, it's not. It's not a good use of time. It's not fruitful. It's not relevant. Like it's not a good use of time. But if Trump is sensing things, and if people are sensing things that there's a lack of genuineness, that you do have a different accent depending on who you're talking to, then I think that there are going to be other avenues to talk about, which is like, well, you used to be in favor of Medicare for all. Now it seems like you are in favor of more affordable medicine. You used to be in favor of healthcare for illegal immigrants. Now it seems like you're not. Like that type of fakeness, that type of shape-shifting, which of course Trump is vulnerable to that too, I gather. All politicians are. But I think that line of where do you stand? Who are you? Where are you as a politician? That's going to be where he should go. And it's just, we're not there yet. And it is frustrating as a conservative that we are not there yet. But I don't know. I think that the race thing is maybe just like top of mind, like, and will open up a broader conversation about who is this person.
One of the things that, I watched the video exchange between Trump and, the start of it. And then as he got in deeper to Scott's, well, he was really more riffing on the question than answering it. And one of the things, and you were kind of hitting at it there a little bit, May, that frustrated me, and again, I mean, listeners will know, and Ken knows, and we were sharing this a little bit before the show. I'm firmly in I was a not Trump Republican, and everybody knows that. But when we kind of think about those identities, I have some significant health crises in my life, health problems in my life, and so I am a chronically ill individual. And one of the things that really kind of early on in that journey that really terrified me was this idea that people would think of me as fake. And I say that because, when you have a chronic illness, you can have really good days and then you can have really terrible, you're in the hospital kind of days. And so, a couple of years ago, I ran my last ever marathon. And a lot of people said, oh, it is so wonderful. You're not ill anymore. And it was hard because you're saying, well, I am. I just enjoying a moment where that's not as apparent. It's not as at the forefront of things. I don't need an assistance at this moment. And then, over the last few weeks, as listeners will know, I very much need it. And that can be really hard. It's really scary to navigate that space. And so I can imagine, so I hear what you're saying, May. Here was this opportunity for Trump to make other kinds of commentary. But it seems to me that in his career, he's never opted to do that. Instead, he weighs into something where I thought, oh my gosh, that doesn't feel like that's a door opener. And it never feels like Trump is having a door opener. And this is from a guy who on some policy issues would even agree with him. And so what do you think about that? Because again, when I hear that, it's really hard for me to hear anything other than, well, it's once again, it's just Trump being a jerk. I don't know where else to go.
Yeah, maybe it was Trump being a jerk, and I guess so Trump being a jerk is obviously that's what happened. I don't know if there's another way to say it. But I think also it was a little bit of an aggressive way to start out the interview, which is hey, we don't want you here. You've said all of these things. People have told us you shouldn't be here. It's well, he is the presidential candidate. So, you didn't have to invite him, I guess, but the person who you did invite on the Democrat side didn't show up. So there was jerkness, I think, on both sides. Rachel's question was a lot, I think, it was harsh, but maybe not, I don't know. It was a harsh question. It was not a friendly, welcoming question. So I think to respond to something that aggressive with equal aggression is just what you're going to get with Trump. He is a jerk, but that's what conservatives have wanted, is that for so long there was this Mitt Romney mentality of I am just going to think the best of the other side. I am going to continue to try and make inroads. We're going to use bipartisan. And for conservatives, they felt as though all of a sudden you couldn't say Merry Christmas anymore because, well, not everyone celebrates Christmas. And so that's really not nice. And so you should say Happy Holidays, or really just don't say anything at all because you don't know what someone else is going through. And so there was this constant minimizing of yourself that and this is it's describing how conservatives felt. I've got to not be who I am because I might hurt somebody or do something. And then all of a sudden, here's this jerk, and he's just going to fight back. And it's wow, he is a bully. He is a bully, but he's a bully on my side. And conservatives felt as though they had never had a bully on their side before, that they had been bullied. And that here was finally a fighter. And there are strong negatives to having a bully. Obviously, it is that they are a bully. That's a strong negative. But then there are some positives, which is you don't mess with the bully sometimes. And so that the same negatives that are there with him and that jerk response are the positives. That's what when I'm saying I don't think it necessarily changes the political calculus, is because we already knew Trump was a jerk, and that was the negative and that was the positive.
So Ken, one of the things that we had seen before Biden had pulled out was that he had been losing pretty significantly some black support in the polls. And this seemed to be an opportunity potentially for him to regain that at one point. But in the wake of Kamala Harris becoming the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, it seems like that is potentially a missed opportunity here. What's your take on that side of things as May moves us in that direction?
Yeah, well, I think the politics of it, Trump Trump is a racist, and that's been his brand for 50 years. And when May was talking about, he's the bully who's going to stick up for one side, I guess. I mean, that was the side that she was talking about was racists, people who hate blacks, in fact, sexist as well, people who hate women. Trump's going to stand up for those people, and so maybe it will help him with those people. But he's got a 50-year record in public life of racism. The first time he ever made page one of the New York Times in his whole life, it was in 1973. And the page one article was that the Trump organization had owned a big apartment complex actually out here in Cincinnati. And his father, Fred Trump, dispatched young Donald to come out here and make sure that they didn't ever rent any apartments to any black people. And he came out here and did that. And eventually the Justice Department brought a housing discrimination case against him. And that's what got him on page one of the Times. I lived in New York in the 80s and 90s, and every New Yorker remembers the whole episode where five teenagers in Central Park, five black teenagers in Central Park who were completely innocent, were actually convicted of raping a jogger in the park. Later they solved the crime and found the real guy who did it. But Trump was paying for all these full-page ads demanding that these teenagers get the death penalty, really just to stir up racism. And that's always been his brand. And I think it's helpful, I guess, in a way that he's just, so willing to own that because, as May said, that will certainly consolidate his support among the racist minority in this country. But I think it definitely, all the minority voters can understand who he is, and he's making that easier. And so I think he is losing support there.
And I just have to disagree with that so much. So, I mean, first of all, like to start this episode by saying that I'm a liar about Kamala Harris when she live in Canada from 1976 to 1982 when she was 12 when she moved. So I don't you can say that that's not living in, I don't know, but that's what that is. But then second of all, I'm the one who knows Trump. He is not a quote unquote racist. And to say that he is there to cover for racists calls me a racist. It says that the people who like him and the people who want him to fight for them are somehow racist and bad. And that is this dangerous language that I thought that this podcast was supposed to combat. And so what Trump is a narcissist. Okay. He likes people who like him. That's that. If there is a black person who likes Trump, he likes them. If there is a white person who does not like Trump, he does not like them. That's all that is. And so, you know what? Call Trump names all you want. But when you say that what he is doing is covering for people who want these types of things, then that calls half the country, including me, really bad people. And I really don't like that.
Well, let me kind of interject here. I mean, to say that, yeah, I know that. I guess I'm a little bit confused. How is calling Trump a racist?
But it wasn't just that Trump is a racist. It's that the people who want Trump and to fight for them, right? That those people, that what they want is racism, right? That what they like about him is his racial tendencies. And that's just not true. It is, by and large, Christians who just feel like they want to live their life without being called bigoted, bad people, anti-LGBT, anti-trans, like all this stuff like that. That's certainly a part of it. And, if we want to talk about the race aspect, there's nothing wrong with being white, right? There's no need to apologize for simply like being whatever your parents came over from Germany. Like there's no need to apologize for that. So sure, there is, I guess, that racial angle, but I don't think that I don't consider that racism.
Well, I guess maybe to Ken's point though, like, so for example, Trump famously back meet with individuals who did purport to be part of the white white.
Is this Fuentes, whatever?
That's one of three I was thinking about, but yeah. So I mean, I don't think that one has to suggest that all Republicans are racist. to say that Trump has certainly had questionable interactions on the interaction of race. I mean, I think at a minimum, yes, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, if we can draw that line of like Trump has had questionable interactions with regard to race, that's fine. I think that's totally like a legitimate question to have. Like I said, my explanation for it is Trump is a narcissist. Like if somebody's like, you're the best, he's not going to say like, let me hear more about your background. He's going to say, come on in and have a meeting. And would you like my signature? Like that's what that is. But, still, I think why is that, or whatever, Nick Fuentes, why is he at Mar-a-Lago? Like he's a bad guy. Fine. Fine. But I guess we get dangerously into MAGA supporters are bad people and racist people pretty quickly. And I do think that there has to be a line there. And so I guess if Trump goes to the National Association of Black Journalists and, can't find it within himself to be like calm and a little bit normal, that's not my favorite. It's not my favorite because it tends to put the rest of us in a bad light. At the same time, he's fighting back the way he would fight back with any white, male, old journalist. And if they come and attack him, he's going to attack them. And in that sense, I think actually, like, he doesn't kid gloves people because of their race. He does not think that they are somehow less able. Somehow, he's an equal opportunity offender. But still, I feel like questioning Trump's behavior, questioning Trump's words, questioning Trump's associates, which of course, if you associate with somebody, like if Barack Obama associates with an anti-Semite, it doesn't mean that Barack Obama is anti-Semitic. And so I think there still has to be some sort of line between what one person does and especially if you've never met them and you don't know, and their supporters and what they want.
Ken?
Yeah, so Trump, I don't really, I guess I must not be living in the same country as May or something, because she was talking about, I guess she was implying that Democrats are the ones who are criticizing Trump because he's white. And I've never heard any Democrat criticize Trump because he's white, but Trump is the one who was going on about Kamala Harris's race. And Trump is the one who, went to, spoke about Charlottesville, Virginia. That was actually his entree into American political life and into his presidential campaign, to talk about how this, avowedly racist, white nationalist, actually genocidal march in Charlottesburg. That there were good people. The people on that side were just as good as the people who opposed Nazism and racism on the other side.
So many times.
That's exactly what his speech said, and he never debunked it. And his anti-immigration policies, he codes that in ways so that racists can certainly understand that he's really only talking about race. He's never, he's married to an immigrant, in fact, to someone who I think could have been seen as an illegal immigrant because she came here legally, but then she worked illegally, which should have disqualified her from then becoming a legal immigrant. But when we're talking about white people from white countries, that's something that he has no problem with at all. So I think it's certainly fair to understand his immigration policies as being racist policies. And racism is a huge part of his brand. Now, it doesn't mean that every single one of his supporters is a racist, but what it means is that racism is part of the coalition that he's put together, that people who are racists, he's appealing to them. They should support him because he's one of them. And then he's also appealing to other groups who support him for other reasons.
Okay, so I don't know why we have to keep talking about Charlottesville. Snopes.com fact check, Trump, very fine people. No, Trump did not call neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. And then the question of whether Trump himself thinks that neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people. He went on, he gave a statement saying that that's not what he meant. Okay, we can just move on.
Well, then I will lay that to bed and move us forward a little bit on to our next story, which is the Wall Street Journal reporter and others being freed in prisoner exchange this week. And so I have to say, personally, I was pretty ecstatic to learn that Evan had finally been released from Russia. He was a Wall Street Journal reporter, and he had been detained, he has been released from detention as part of a large-scale prisoner exchange between the United States and Russia. In fact, as reported universally, it's going to be the largest prisoner swap between the U.S. and its allies and Russia since the Cold War. The exchange includes 16 political prisoners, journalists, and others. President Biden called the deal, quote, a feat of diplomacy, and thanked the allies who worked with the U.S. He said, quote, this is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world whom you can trust and depend on, end quote. He had been arrested in Moscow way back in March of 2023 and was the first journalist, again, another first since the Cold War, to be charged with espionage. Just last month, a Russian court had sentenced him to 16 years in prison, something we had been talking about on the Discord exchange for those of you who are part of our Discord. Politically, this has led to some questions on if there has been a changing on how Russia views the American landscape. I have seen several pieces saying, well, this indicates that they think that it's less likely that Trump is going to win. I have seen some Republicans this morning saying, well, no, this is a sign that Putin thinks that Trump is going to win. And so there has also been some kind of question about how much it's been liked. I'll say overall, I've loved this, but it does beg some questions about what do we think this means? That has been kind of, nobody wants to yet, it's too new yet to maybe exactly say, here's the politics of this, but it seems like everybody is trying to decide or to gaze into the Russian crystal ball about what this means in relation to American politics. I started with May on the other one. So Ken, why don't you give us your thoughts on the prisoner exchange? And again, obviously, since you love the Cold War era things so much too.
Yeah, well, it's the breaking news, and so when you're asking about impacts on American politics, I think it's possibly a little bit early to say. I was thinking a little more about the substance of the whole thing, and it's it did come at a cost because we had to really press our allies pretty hard to release some Russian criminals, who had been assassinating other Russians in European countries of our allies.
Yeah, there was one in particular in Germany.
In Germany and a couple in Slovenia, it's a complex framework to think about because I guess you don't want to give Putin the message that if he sends his assassins into Europe to assassinate people that he wants assassinated and they get arrested, then all he'll have to do is, kidnap some Americans in Russia and then he'll be able to get them back. So, I think that is a concern, but and it also, does put a little bit of stress on our alliances with some of our allies to ask them to do that kind of thing. But on the other hand, I think on balance, it is a good thing despite those costs because it's good that these hostages could come home. It's good that we could have a productive political exchange with the Russian government that could be a step towards defusing some tensions. Although of course it doesn't end the war in Ukraine or anything like that. But any opportunities for productive dialogue that leads to a result, I think is good. So I think it's basically all for the good, or mostly for the good, more for the good than for the bad, I'd say. And I also think it's pretty remarkable the timeline that President Biden was able to accomplish all this, which was actually literally, on the day before and the same day that he decided and then announced that he wasn't going to be running for re-election. Like for him to compartmentalize that way, get this thing done exactly while he was probably preoccupied with that. I think really does give some lie to this idea that he's not qualified to do the job right now.
May, what are your thoughts about this Cold War historic deal?
Yeah, I mean, and I know the Wall Street Journal put out this it will take an hour to listen to it online of like the goings on behind the scenes in order to make this happen.
I have been reading it. I've been reading and listening to that. Yes, yes.
It seems like it was a huge lift from a lot of countries. I do think that it will, right now it seems to be positive news coming out of the Biden administration. But of course, it's positive news coming out of Putin's office as well. So every both sides are claiming a win, and maybe that means it's a good deal, and maybe that means it's a bad deal. Even the Wall Street Journal said we recognize that what happened here we're happy to obviously have Evan back, but it's not necessarily a good thing because we don't want to incentivize this type of behavior. So I'm not exactly sure really what to think. But there was, I saw in the New York Times, some of the families of people who are still imprisoned in Russia, mostly various drug charges, kind of like Brittany Griner, that they're not thrilled about it because some Russian dissidents were let go and American citizens are still there. So I don't know if we're going to hear more grumbling in that direction. Yeah. And then, of course, the person who Putin wanted the most and who told Tucker Carlson, great guy, need this guy back. He's been released back to Russia. So I think there's pros and cons on both sides. And will the Biden administration be able to use this as a sort of wind in their sails? Probably, maybe. The Republicans have been showing a few gaffes, I guess, where it's like, hey, President Biden, Trump said that he would be able to get this done. What do you think about that? And he said, well, why didn't he? Well, of course, that Trump's team is using that. It's like, well, the Wall Street Journal reporter was not taken hostage under Trump's watch. Of course, Paul Whelan was. And then Kamala Harris in the middle of the night gave some sort of her first unscripted remarks, really, that were sort of word salady. So I think kind of focusing on that because there's just not been a lot of opportunity for her to interact with the press unscripted. But on the deal itself, I'm not sure what to think yet. I just don't know.
What do you guys think that this means? I mean, we are coming up, how goodness gracious, I was trying to think of last time we had done our 4-person show, the last time we've had a 4-person show, we did a 4-person show as it related to the war in Ukraine and Russia. And is there any sense, and I'll start with you, Ken, that this kind of negotiation process, and you had brought it up, indicates a possibility that there is negotiation possible, that there is a new level of negotiation that might be possible that would end the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, yes, but it's a long-term project, right? And it does depend on Harris winning the election, because I think, Putin, certainly is hoping that Trump's going to win the election. And I do think if Trump wins the election, then there won't have to be any negotiating like this, because the U.S. will unilaterally surrender Ukraine to Russia. So Russia will have total victory in their Ukraine war. And so with that being kind of looming in the distance, Putin certainly doesn't have any incentive to any further negotiating in the next 6 months. But I think if Harris wins the election, and especially if the Dems hang on in the Senate, and I think, which could be tough, but I think more likely the Dems will retake the House, if we've got a Dem administration, then I think this successful negotiation does create a framework where the U.S. would keep supporting Ukraine unless there's a negotiated settlement, and then in that case it creates a framework for a possible negotiated settlement.
May, do you mean on your side, do you think there's a possibility for the end of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And if Trump wins, since that's your side, do you think there's a possibility for that to happen? Or do you think that Ken is right even though you guys disagree ideologically?
I mean, there has to be, right? We can't just keep there will not be political support for I think additional like at some point sending more money is not going to be a political option, so there really has to be an end. Either that or the American people need to be given more information. It obviously is the case that there's more information out there about what an end might look like, what we need to do to get there. But
I'm not. I'm just honest. I'm not quite sure what you meant. Do you mean an end in the sense that would be a borders that exist of Ukraine, or do you mean an end in the sense of we allow Russia to occupy Ukraine? I was just confused.
Well, no, that that somehow this stalemate gets broken into a resolution. I don't think that. I don't know. Are people thinking? I don't know what the end is going to look like. So, but at some point, so I guess when you say Russian occupation, I'm not saying like of all of Ukraine, but even President Biden said that like some small amount of incursion would be like okay. So just that the stalemate will be broken into some sort of deal where arms will be set down, and that obviously that has to happen at some point, because obviously there can't just be endless support without some sort of resolution. So I am not the person to answer what that resolution will look like. And so
Trey, can I just, JD Vance might be the person to answer what that resolution would look like. And he's been pretty clear about it, right? JD Vance is literally going around saying, I don't care what happens to Ukraine. I don't care what happens to Ukrainians. We just need to stop supporting them entirely. And by implication, let Putin do literally whatever he wants there, just to sort of accept an abject defeat and let Putin have a free hand, and that's the settlement, just raw surrender. And Vance has just been going around openly advocating for that. Now, a negotiated settlement, which would happen if we had a Dem administration, I hope, might involve having Ukraine give up some small percentage of its territory to Russia, as May said, but a Republican victory in November would mean letting Russia take as much of Ukraine's territory as Russia wants.
Do you think the J.D. Vance position is likely, May?
No, and I don't know if that's the J.D. Vance. Like, he doesn't want any more funds going over there, but I've never heard anything remotely close to Russia should do whatever it wants. I think instead, actually, what people see is that when Trump was president, you didn't have a Russian incursion into Ukraine, and that happened under Biden's watch. So I think what people want is the pre-Biden world to exist, and I think that that's what people think that they're buying, think that they're getting with a Republican administration. So I don't know what the J.D. Vance position is, because if we're talking about it on this podcast as if it is like Russia, go do whatever you want, I don't see that as the J.D. Vance position, because he is Trump's running mate and Russia did not do whatever it wanted.
I was thinking more specifically, Vance has been vocal that we need to end all kinds of fiscal and other kinds of support for Ukraine. And I think for a lot of analysts, the assumption is that if you do that, if Ukraine allies ceased to give munitions, et cetera, to Ukraine, I'm not sure how long Ukraine could continue to fight a war So I guess that's what I was thinking about. When I was saying his position was, if those kinds of dollars, if that kind of support went away, I don't think you have a long-term conflict. You probably have a conflict in terms of however long munitions run out.
I just don't think that that's yet what's popular with the American people. It seems like we're still in this in some sort of confusing middle ground where people don't really, there's, some people want to give more money, some people want to give less money, some people want to, maintain where we're at. And it's like roughly a third shifting here and there of each. And I don't think JD Vance's position of we should give less is all of a sudden going to become like the dominant strain within America or within, Republicans more than it currently is. I think what needs to happen, and I don't see why this, oh, well, if it was a Democrat administration, then we'd have some sort of negotiated settlement. Well, we currently have that. We currently have a Democrat administration, and we don't have a settlement. So, can't. I guess I don't see that being the case, but nor do I see necessarily clarity out of Republicans. Like I really just, and I'm talking about the Senate, like Senate Republicans, I want to see a plan. That's all. That's what I want to see, because I think that Americans can say, I'm willing to spend more money. I'm willing to get to the place where we sort of are in a pre-Biden administration world. I'm willing to do that. But I need to know at what cost, right? So what sort of munitions are we going to be giving up that we need for other things? Like, just give me the plan. Tell me what the plan is. And that's what's been so frustrating. So I do think that if JD Vance is serious and wants to spend less money in Ukraine, then at least hopefully it'll force a plan. It'll force somebody to say, this is what we need in order to put this down. And no, I do not think it is just let Russia do whatever, it wants to do. JD Vance did go overseas to go fight for our country. After all, he is in favor of Western values of democracy. But yeah,
JD Vance literally said on Steve Bannon's podcast these exact words, and I'm quoting. He says, "I really don't care what happens to Ukraine one way or the other." I don't know how else you can interpret that. He also said he doesn't want to fight Vladimir Putin. He says, "I did not serve in the Marine Corps to go and fight Vladimir Putin because he doesn't believe in transgender rights, which is what the U.S. State Department is saying is a major problem in Russia." So he's really both saying he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine, and he's ridiculing the idea that we have any reason to stand up against Russia. And in terms of what you said that the Democratic administration didn't get a settlement. The very reason we're talking right now today about this topic on this show is because the Biden administration did just negotiate a settlement of this hostage exchange, and the point is that's creating a framework for settling bigger issues. But you're only going to get a settlement in Ukraine if you're willing to continue to fight up to the point where the other side has a reason to settle. You can't get a settlement if you just say we're walking away and you take what you want.
May, last thoughts on that? Yes.
I guess it's easy to not care what happens to Ukraine if that's the end of it, because Ukraine obviously should care about what happens to Ukraine, and it's up to Ukraine to say, tell the American people, this is why you should care about us. And I think that they're trying to do that, but the big explanation that we've heard so far is if you let Russia take Ukraine, it's not just a Ukraine problem. All of a sudden, Russia will advance its territory well beyond that, and there are all sorts of problems with that. And so I think what the JD Vance position is kind of like these, small territorial incursions into parts of Ukraine. It doesn't exactly matter what the latitude and longitude are of every country in the world. It does matter whether Russia takes, that and is emboldened and able to move further than that. So as long, I guess that's how I would describe the JD Vance position. And I don't think necessarily that there's anything shocking about that, which is that we have to contain Russian aggression and that they can't have this win. And so question whether, what level of win will continue to contain them. But that's, I think, what's frustrating is nobody has described that, what that is. And do I think that this hostage exchange is in the right direction toward the end of that war? I guess we can be hopeful. Like I'm not against being hopeful. I just don't necessarily feel that. I don't sense that, but I'm willing to be surprised.
Well, let's turn our attention, because we have actually been going a little bit long, but I want to get us to at least our third story. And that was some major happenings in the Middle East. And that centers around the killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh. It required getting a bomb into his heavily guarded room in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps guest house. And it took place at a very symbolic moment during the inauguration of the new Iranian president. And it happened just days after there had been a blast killing Salah al-Aruri. And so, as the Wall Street Journal and others have noted, this means that Israel, again, I think we're all kind of assuming that it is Israel, although they have not yet confirmed that, has deep capability inside of Iran. And it's also likely, as been being reported, that Iran is likely to attempt to retaliate. As a matter of fact, on Thursday, in response to questioning, President Biden said that the killing, quote, doesn't help, end quote, the negotiation process, and said that he had had conversations with Netanyahu earlier in the day over the matter, implying, of course, that Netanyahu was the individual who had kind of been the center of these strikes. Haniyeh, it was Hamas's most senior official and was highly involved in the ceasefire and the hostage release talks from his base in Qatar. And President Biden said he was therefore, quote, very concerned, end quote, about rising tensions in the Middle East. He said, quote, we have a basis for a ceasefire. He, meaning Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, should move on it, and they, referring to Hamas, should move on it now, end quote. So politically, it remains open what will be and who will be the new head of Hamas. And certainly Hamas has escalated their rhetoric in the last couple of days. As a matter of fact, this morning, saying that the death of children in Israel is no different than the bomb blast. And so as we move closer to the 1-year anniversary of Hamas's unprecedented attack, which really triggered this situation, this is still a kind of a question mark about what will continue to happen in the region. But it also becomes part and parcel to the presidential campaign on both sides. And so, May, why don't you start us off on what you think about what's happening here, Israel's position as it relates and as it relates to American foreign policy?
Yeah, I guess Israel's problem is that they just didn't do any of this sooner. I think that if they would have, in the aftermath, in the emotion of October 7th, not done what they did, which is they really did try to move slowly, like go through these get their hostages back, which of course we still don't have the hostages back. And there was not a major action in Iran. There was not a major action to, go after Hezbollah and Hamas.
So focus not to focus so much on the Gaza Strip, but to focus on these officials.
Yeah, that now that we are, as you said, coming up on the 1 year, all they've lost the emotion on their side for a lot of people, and so these are huge military feats. I mean, to have the intelligence, the bomb that was placed weeks in advance. I mean, these are really impressive military maneuvers, and yet they're facing some criticism because now it is so late afterward. But I guess I don't know, this for them after their 9/11 to go and take out terrorist leaders. I think that there's a lot to celebrate about that. And if this was in November of last year, I think it would be purely celebratory. Instead, it's like, well, who did they tell? Why didn't they tell the US? Who knew about this? Like, there's just all this question asking, and I don't know how to attribute that except for just this happens with time.
Ken, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the timing issues that May was talking about. I don't know how. I mean, Israel has a peace treaty with Qatar, which is where Haniyeh lives. So Israel was not going to kill somebody inside Qatar, which is where he usually is. But on all the bigger points, I think more bad than good comes of this. A little bit of good comes of it because I think Haniyeh certainly deserved it. He got what was coming to him, and I think it also does demonstrate Israelis' military and intelligence capabilities in ways that hopefully should be a deterrent to its enemies. But I think much more bad than good comes out of this because Netanyahu just signed the death warrant for all the Israeli hostages who are still living. He made it completely impossible for the hostage negotiation settlements and the ceasefire settlements that apparently had been pretty far along and progress was being made. He exploded the whole thing, and therefore, I don't know how many of the 120 are still alive. It might only have been half, but he did kill all those Israelis, and I think that was a terrible thing to do. And he also, greatly increased the chance of a regional war. Which could be disastrous. Now we still don't know exactly how Iran will respond. I guess the Ayatollah Khamenei said that they will respond in a serious way. Last time Israel did a successful targeted assassination on Iranian officials, although that was in Lebanon, not in Iran. Iran sent 300 missiles into Israel, but because of the U.S. and Britain and even Saudi Arabia and Jordan helping in shooting down those missiles, the damage was pretty minimal. But it's hard to know if they'll try something more. Because of Trump ending the Iran nuclear deal, Iran has since then continued to work towards having an Iranian nuclear bomb, which they had been stopped from doing when Obama had the nuclear deal. And I was reading that they may be as close as 1 or 2 weeks away from being able to complete building an atomic bomb. So that, is, I don't think that they're going to use it, but it's certainly much more likely than it was before this assassination. So I don't, I just think there's so many downsides in terms of regional instability and escalating further conflict and disrupting process towards a Gaza ceasefire that I think they heavily outweigh the upsides.
My last question for you guys before we finish up the show, May, assuming that I don't think there's a lot of an assumption here, assuming that there is some kind of retaliatory measure, do you think that retaliatory measure occurs purposefully at a particular cycle in the American election process? And if so, what does that do?
I don't. So I guess I want to make sure I understand the question, because
in other words, do you think Iran and its allies would attempt its retaliatory measures in a way so as to coincide with particular times dates and interferences of the American election cycle?
Well, the only intelligence that I guess we have, which came out on Monday, is that Iran is working to undermine Donald Trump. And so, you know, whether they time retaliation, whether they intervene in other ways, it's obviously something to be aware of, that that they're trying to support Kamala Harris, and I guess related to that, Joe Biden's administration. But because of that, I would say that no, Iran has bigger problems, which is an emboldened and clearly put together Israel, where somehow there was a lapse on October 7th, and that lapse seems to be no more. And that, yeah, but I don't.
So more related to
I guess,
to Israel itself, then obviously.
Yeah.
Fair. Ken, last thoughts on same question.
I don't think there's a question about the timing. The response is going to be soon. It's going to be well before the election. I think that the bigger question is going to be how big is it, right? What do they do? I mean, if they shoot 300 more missiles that can be shot down just as a symbolic thing, then I think just like the last time they did that, that's not going to have a big effect on U.S. domestic politics. On the other hand, if they actually drop a nuclear bomb on Israel, which again I don't think is likely, but I think it's not impossible. And therefore they kill most of the people in Israel, and then maybe Israel, because it has mutually assured destruction policy, launches back a nuclear bomb and kills a lot of people in Iran. That might have an impact on U.S. domestic politics. It's certainly going to have an impact on the world. But even there, I find it a little hard to predict which way the impact would be on U.S. domestic politics.
Absolutely fair. Well, I have to say it was a lot of fun getting to effectively be this week's Politics Guys, the moderator. So, May, Ken, thanks for being your respective sides.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trey.
Well, if you're not already a supporter of the Politics Guys, I hope you'll consider becoming one. Without our supporters, we couldn't keep this podcast going. And when you become a supporter, you get all sorts of good stuff. And that includes, like what I've mentioned already, things like our very active Politics Guys Discord group. I have a lot of fun in there. For those of you that have been around the block, you'll know that sometimes I post maybe more than I should in the immediate aftermath of a surgery. So, hey, I'll be there, So there's other things as well, my teasing asides. We've got Politics Guys in gear. There's all different kinds of benefits. And if you want to check that out, just head to patreon.com/politicsguys. And you can see all the different levels of support. And like I mentioned, you can be like Owen and sign up for a yearly membership. And as a result, you get a discount, a 10% discount. There's other ways of supporting the show as well, including Venmo, where we're at Politics Guys. You can also support the show through PayPal. All of those support links are in the show notes, as well as on the website at politicsguys.com/support. Now, one of the really cool things that you get when you are a supporter is our supporters exclusive midweek show. And this week, we're actually heading on to the 12th Amendment. So that's always a lot of fun. And we'd love for you to be a part of that. But I also get it. I've got 3 kiddos. I know what it's like to not have a lot of money. So if you're just not in a financial position to support the podcast, but you'd still be able to listen to that supporters exclusive show, it is a possibility. You just need to reach out to us at mail@politicsguys.com so that we can work things out. Whether you're a supporter or not, we would really appreciate it, especially if you haven't already, to subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever podcast app you use. And you can share all those episodes on social media. If you've got any kind of questions or anything at all that you'd like to share with us, you can always reach us at the old school mail way at mail@politicsguys.com. You can also get us on X and Facebook, and you'll find all of those links in the show notes. I want to give an especial shout out to the amazing executive producers of the Politics Guys, who are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. Thank you all. We'll be back with a new episode this weekend. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,